Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I'm one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Hey, Cammy.
Hey, Bryant.
How's it going? You doing all right?
I am super fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. We're trucking along, getting into summer. School's out almost for Kinley. So
School's out for summer.
Yeah. No, we can't. We'll get sued. Twisted Sister would be all over us.
Don't do
right?
that.
No, they're great. Cammy, we got a fun topic today on Mythstorie. We're going into it's hard to say the origin. I was about to say British Islands, and that's probably the best way for this word. The will o' the wisp is the topic today. So, Mythstorie every week we discuss, we give a story, and we just try and make ourselves a little smaller or smarter.
We try to dwarf ourselves.
We try to make the world smaller. That's what it is, Yeah. See, I'm smart. Cammy, why don't you go ahead and hit us with your story of the will o' the wisp?
Absolutely. So I used historydaily.org, Will o' the Wisp, Deadly Fairy Lights. Will of the Scottish Isles was the village blacksmith. From a young age, he was known as a trickster, and his parents sent him to learn a trade as soon as he was old enough to bang a hammer. Though he was a wonderful blacksmith, he often cheated his customers out of gold by using low-quality metals in his works. The men who came to him for arms would often have their swords break in battle, but they would not live to warn others, so Will made quite a fortune during his life. Upon his death, he hurried up the stairs to heaven, but Peter knew of his wickedness and told him there was no place for him there. The cunning man charmed the gatekeeper into giving him 10 more years on earth to make it right. But as soon as he was back to the mortal plane, he continued wasting his years by hoarding more gold and offering more men to be taken by war. So when his 10 years passed, God himself met Will at the gate and sent him back to earth as a spirit as punishment. The devil, seeing a kindred soul, but powerless against God's will, could not let him into hell, but gave him a single ember from the fires of damnation to keep him warm as he roamed the world. But Will could not change his path of treachery. He used his little light, dim like that of a dying lantern, to woo strangers deep into the night until they lost their way. Their bodies often found the next morning caught in the nearby bog, all seeming to have died of fright.
Ah, that's great. And that, Kimmy, your stories always do great because I feel like I'm on an English assignment in high school where I have to analyze your story and extract the themes and stuff, and that's it. That's like a big part of what it is. Yeah, especially like the guiding and all that. The will o' the wisp. So this word really comes from the specific will o' the wisp, O apostrophe the wisp, comes from the early 17th century, thanks to Emma Online and Google's etymology wrap up. Comes from will with the wisp, which means a wisp was a handful of lighted hay.
Okay.
So I guess if you needed a quick cheap candle, you'd be like, "Oi, get the wisp." That's how they talked back then.
They just put it in their hand?
Yeah.
Like Prometheus, just...
Yeah. Just get the wisp of hay, and then that's how you see around for 5 seconds. And so it of course, what these sort of things are, and I do have the exact science behind it. I'll finish with that. But it's these phenomenon that you can see sometimes, especially in swampy areas, where there'll be these kind of lights, these little lights that are balls or round and small, and they kind of stick out there. What's interesting in this, whenever you look this up in folklore, it's also called ignis fatuus, which is Latin for giddy flame. So that makes sense. It's this flame that it's kind of talked about moving around, bouncing around. Totally makes sense. What's interesting though, the sources say that despite that being a very Latin name, there wasn't any ancient records or classical records that talk about this. We might not have them, but it doesn't seem like it was important enough for them to really talk about it. This is me talking. I think that it was it's clear that this was a very big idea in the British Islands. There's lots of swamps and stuff like that there, and because I'm talking about Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and they all have their own kind of versions, but the British Islands have the most similar. And I think that it sort of was one of those medieval bestiary things, where by the after the Romans left, like post like 6th century AD, everyone the scholars are all learning Latin, and so I'm guessing because the another word that's used is that it's a foolish or silly or simplifier. So I'm thinking maybe they just kind of took the old English version and then translated it to Latin just to make it sound cool. So, but the interesting thing, Ignis Fatuus is something you will hear a lot, but it doesn't look like it has Latin origins. It looks like that was a added later. So just to kind of keep that in mind. Yeah, I thought that was really wild.
I do want to say when you said bestiary, I was like, Candace, help me research this. And she was like, Will of the Wisp has a power of 7.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah.
It's chaotic evil.
That's so funny. Is that like a D&D source?
Yeah, it was like a D&D thing. It's like
the Will of the Wisp is definitely, I can't think of an RPG in particular, maybe like Final Fantasy, but yeah, it'll usually be like a little enemy or something like that. I was going to say this for the end, but this is a good segue. The Pokemon is the one that I really remember it being in. It's a move. It's an attack that Pokemon can learn. Pokemon, there's tons of different versions of them. They all have different types like fire and ice and ghost, and the moves that they can use. And Will of the Wisp, I would see this when I was a kid. It just did not make sense, like seeing these words like this, but it's a move that inflicts burn. It's a status. So a Pokemon will have it and they'll take damage, burn damage every now and then. What's really cool, I went on like the Wikipedia for Pokemon called Bulbapedia, and all the Pokemon that learn it, I know, like Bulbasaur, all the Pokemon that learn it are mainly ghost types Pokemon, or in some cases fire ghosts, but most of them are ghost types, except for a couple others like Ninetales, which is directly related to the nine-tailed fox, which also has its own
a spirit.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. All the Pokemon that kind of that organically learn it, because it looks like most fire types you can teach it to them like externally, but Pokemon will learn moves as they level up. The ones that learn it are typically, almost all of them are ghost types, and that's the big thing here. The ghost lights, the Will of the Wisp, it's always sort of attested to these ideas of death and being in swampy areas, and the person who's using it, whether their name is Will or in many cases it's Jack in the British Islands, they are specifically using it. They're dead. They did something bad, and they got to guide people. And because in some cases they're guiding people, and it's good. They're like, go this way, and in some cases it's bad. There was a nice resource. I didn't spend too much time on it. It was pretty big. It looks like it's from Pitt.edu. I guess it's from a college, but DL Ashleman has this website. I've already included it in the link. So click this. It's basically a bunch of European Will o' the Wisp and Jack-o'-lantern myth. They're kind of connected here, and it talks about in Ireland, if you see it, it's a bad sign. In like West Ireland, I think specifically is what he uses or what he takes from the sources. And so it's really cool. It can kind of be a good or a bad thing. Typically, though, the person is doomed to haunt the marshes for their misdeeds, as Cammy's story did it. Explain that, and whether it's malicious or not, it's kind of up to how you feel about it. So this is something also when Wikipedia talks about British folklorist K.M. Briggs, she was really important in British folklore in the 70s with kind of connecting and bringing this up down to how we understand it. So what's really cool, this is kind of everywhere though, and you have to imagine, I mean, there's swamps and similar conditions everywhere. What's wild though, in a lot of Latin American countries, they are specifically witches. Brujas witches in Mexico, the Sucoyan in Trinidad and Tobago, that is a fireball witch, so that's not quite Latin America, but it's still like a lot of these places, it's a specific witch and a fire witch at that too. So but yeah, in Colombia and a few other places, it's a vicious grandmother who raised her grandchildren without morals. Don't do that. And the kids became thieves and murderers. So when you see the Will o' the Wisp, you're like, Grammy, why didn't you take care of them? So yeah, there's a lot of other ones. There's even in Wikipedia talks about a swampy area of Massachusetts known as the Bridgewater Triangle has a folklore of ghostly orbs of light. So it has its own sort of local version of these. And so I'll go to, it's a natural explanation here. It's the oxidation of phosphine, diphosphine, and methane. These compounds produced by organic decay, that's the key word, cause photon emissions. So dead things are in specific areas, and it's sort of a phenomenon, and then boom, you get little photon emissions, which are totally fine. But that makes sense. It totally connects. There's a theme of death here. And if you can imagine being like a peasant and you're in the swamp, you have to grab something from the swamp that you forgot or something, and you see a dead deer.
Because you're just in the swamp.
Yeah, you left your stick there earlier, and you see like a dead something or other in the corner, and that's already creeping you out. And then you see the will-o'-the-wisp, and you're like, and you run, and you're like, Jack's here. And that, so yeah, it kind of adds to the whole like mystery of it all. So it seems so specifically the will-o'-the-wisp, it's very British in origin. Wisp comes from hay that you light, which I assume it's for light, like physical light, being able to see. The Roman or the Latin stuff kind of came later. We don't have Roman sources that
a
talk
lot of
about
those
this.
places did communicate in Latin. So
yeah, it was the language of the scholars. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was the language of the scholars. The bestiaries, all that. That's what you did. And one big thing I didn't really touch on. We've done an episode on fairies and other kind of things like this before, but that's where the folklore is really attested to. In fact, in that Pitt EDU source, they actually point. The Ashleman source, they point that it's in some cases it's a type of fairy. So you're seeing a subsect of the fairies right there. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah. Another big theme too is the soul of unbaptized. That's another really big theme.
I did see that. Yeah.
That goes in several different places, whether it's Europe or Latin America. So that seems to be something. So I mean, this is an organic thing that science can explain. It's natural. We've been able to observe it for hundreds of years. So it makes sense. And it just seems like the British Islands have their own little version that kind of grew. And then, how they love throwing Jack on myth things. We've talked a lot of Jacks on our show, of spring-heeled kinds and stuff like that. So this is just
a lantern of Jack.
Exactly. Yeah. One other thing too, that was really cool. So, Puck, Robin Goodfellow, Pixies and Fairies, that's actually Puka is a Welsh version of or variation, I should say, of this as well. And it's kind of Puka kind of looks like Puck as well, because Welsh is kind of wild. And so I thought that was an interesting thing. That might be where we kind of get the name Puck in the fairy world, is from this Welsh Puka. Which can be spelled with Y's for the O sound or O's. But if you kind of look at it with the Y, you might think of it as Puck. You see where I'm going? Because it'd be like P-Y-Y. I can't remember if it's K-A or C. Oh, here it is. Not Y, W. P-W-C-A or P-O-O-K-A. But if you look at the P-W-C-A, it's literally like Pucka, if you weren't paying attention to the W being like a U or something like that. The Hitodama of Japan, there's a lot of different versions. I mean, there's Chinese variations that were observed in medieval texts, but the Hitodama in Japan, which is still like a very modern thing, is sort of its version. What's really wild though is there's it's regional. There's Hitodama in cities, there's Hitodama in different places. They all have different names, and they also have some ancient sources, or not ancient, but medieval and above sources that kind of talk about that. And all these different places have their own kind of variations. And from Fireball, which is to it being the jack-o'-lantern, where he puts the fire in a turnip or in a pumpkin, depending on where you are, and then uses it to light his way or to trick you and kill you. Who knows? What have you done? Were you the grandma who didn't take care of her kids or not? But I think that about does it. Thank you so much, Cammy, for your story. This was a fun one to look at. I can't remember what even caused me. Oh, no, yeah. So, yeah, Hitodama, and then looking that up, it's the will-o'-the-wisp. That's what kind of connected it there. We were going to start originally on just the Hitodama, but it really the will o' the wisp phenomenon is the greater one, and it's kind of more focused there. It's a little simpler in Japanese folklore and stuff like that. But we hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythstorie. Please let us know if you have any subjects you'd like us to cover or topics. We've got all of our links in our link tree in the description below. But mythstorie@gmail.com. Myth story, all one word, story with an IE at the end of it. I still, whenever I type it, Cammy, every now and then I'll Mythstoire. I'll stick the I behind, like flip the R in it, and I'm like, that's our French bureau. Like that's well, yeah, we're loosely associated with Mythstoire. Well, thanks again, guys, for listening. I think that's it. Cammy, you have any to add?
That's it.
Awesome. Well, everyone, we will see you next time.
Oh.
Oh.